Great, thank you, Kelly. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Human Powered and Society Embracing session of Transcending the Crisis virtual conference. My name is Denise DiPiano. I'm an HR leader and catalyst that values today's topics and integrates them in HR practices that respect human dignity and achieve business outcomes. I'm very excited about today's conversations as we explore, share, and learn from each other's perspectives, wisdoms, and experiences. I am very pleased to have with us today Marguerite Coetzee from South Africa. So welcome, Marguerite. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what you do, what your work is?
Sure, thank you, Denise. So I guess in short, I'm an anthropologist as well as a futurist from South Africa. I was born into a time where the country was transitioning into a democracy. So being in a turbulent situation is something that I feel familiar with. I guess what I'm talking about today is this project that I started where I combine anthropology and futures. I call it Omniology, which I later found out there's already a book on it. So the intention behind it was to have this, study or knowledge of everything. I'm really interested in understanding what makes us human, what is the human condition, what are those universal truths that anyone anywhere in the world can relate to at any point in history, but also looking at how do those truths play out in different cultural contexts. So I guess for me, this pandemic is really fascinating just because it's a conversation that we've had in South Africa many times before. It's this idea that the past is another country that we can no longer visit, and the future is a land that we have not yet gone to, but we are on the journey there.
Oh, I love that. I like that metaphor. So, so tell it. I know that you're interested in kind of using metaphors, and I know that you have some slides about that, and in particular, kind of the as you put it, the poetry and the potency of language. So do you want to get into that a little bit and as it relates to obviously the narratives and themes of today, anti-fragility and complexity and randomness and uncertainty?
Yes, so I'm so grateful to be part of this conversation, especially that we get to talk about a human-related topic. It just brings to mind this idea that I've been seeing on social media, that a pandemic does not break the system, but it exposes a broken system. So a pandemic holds up a mirror to society and forces us to reflect what is it that we need to change and what is this post-normal world we want to enter into. So just in terms of language and understanding how language shapes the way we see and experience and shape the world, there's a tool that I really wanted to share with you, developed by Professor Sohail Inayatullah. He's a futurist. It's called causal layered analysis. So what this tool does is it breaks down a problem into different levels, and you can kind of analyze and assess the different levels and reconstruct it and transform it to just change your ideas or understanding of it, as well as the solutions that you then create for it. So maybe we can just share the first image of the first metaphor. Don't know if you can present it on the screen.
Kelly? I think Kelly's, there you go.
Awesome. Okay, so the way that Sohail applies causal layered analysis is, to map our experiences and unpack our issues and reimagine the future that we currently see. And applying this to the pandemic that we are in right now, I'm sure everybody has seen this metaphor of pandemic as war being used. So it seems that the world is at war with COVID-19. we are united against this common enemy. We're fighting a common goal to eliminate the threat to human life and national security, even if it is at times, at violent means or aggressive means. And in this narrative, citizens become soldiers, and it becomes our duty to fight and protect our country's borders and our security, and sometimes blindly obey our power-wielding leaders. So it becomes a bit problematic. The narrative can be quite damaging. It leaves us feeling a little bit, disempowered. These power dynamics sometimes go unchecked, and these restrictions are enforced. For example, in South Africa, we call it a lockdown, which has a lot of negative connotations to it. It kind of makes you feel criminalized when you've got a curfew and certain things are banned and you get punished when you break the rules. So yeah, this is just an example of a negative way of looking at the pandemic and seeing how that impacts the way that we behave. Alternatively, if you wanted to use a more positive metaphor, there's another emerging narrative around the pandemic as a river. So just as, a river has moments of slow calm or turbulence or murky shallows or clear areas and free-flowing paths or diverging streams, the pandemic operates in the same way. It's not going to be consistent or the same experience for everybody. And what we then need to do to navigate this river is to develop a map that we can use to anticipate any obstacles or to know how to overcome any challenges that we might face. And we could have a strategic direction that we then put into place. And in this narrative, instead of being soldiers or survivors, we become explorers. And we have the sense of agency to create the landscape that we want.
So you provided two different lenses to kind of leverage the CLA model, obviously the pandemic as a war and pandemic as a river. How do we best use those two views? Are we to embrace both of them, embrace one of them? Is one fragile? Is one anti-fragile? Kind of just talk, if you could walk us through your thinking on that.
Yes, so maybe if you just look at the tool itself. So at the very top of the pyramid, you've got your obvious problem, which is something that you would hear about in the news, or it's the conversations that people are having. This just seems to be the dominant narrative of the superficial problem that we have. And on the second level below that, you've got your driving forces, which are context dependent. So you would have your social forces, your technological forces, all of these different things that are enabling this problem or perpetuating it. The third level of the pyramid, this is where you find your worldviews or the narratives that people have about what's happening, and it's more deep rooted. And then at the very foundation, you've got your myths and metaphors, which are more of a long-term emotive kind of response to the problem. So once you place different narratives into the structure, you can kind of deconstruct it and see what is at the foundation, where is this coming from, and how is that supporting the problem that we see, and where are we stuck, and how can we resolve that? So when it comes to the war metaphor, you can see on the different levels that it creates other problems. So it just creates this idea that we are okay with sending our healthcare workers to, what would be called the front line. We treat them like heroes, and sometimes they're expected to sacrifice themselves for the greater good. Or they might be, what is called collateral damage. So it just becomes very negative and disempowering when you talk about a problem like this.
So I guess I'm struck by, or I'm curious of your perspective, if you feel that one is, let me say it a different way. The lessons that we can learn from both the positive and the dominant, right? Those are two different, but still there's lessons there. So when we're thinking of the narratives of today, of the randomness and the uncertainty, how can one interpret those to kind of, again, weave it into the anti-fragility mindset?
So I guess with the river metaphor, it's more empowering and transformational in the sense that it's an ongoing process. It's not stating that we have an enemy, this is our mission, we need to accomplish it. If we lose, it's a failed mission. Whereas with the river metaphor, it's something that's more of a process, it's collaborative, it's more empowered. You've got a landscape that is changing. It's not, set in stone. So if you had to apply this to your business, it would, internally you could look at how do we talk about ourselves and how do we communicate with our audience, and what kind of implications are we creating through that? Are our narratives more empowering and transformative, or are they more, creating negative connotations to that?
So I guess what I'm trying to kind of understand is, or from my perspective, there's value in pandemic as a war and pandemic as a river, and that you can learn from both of them, and one isn't necessarily anti-fragile or fragile, but there's elements of both in both metaphors. So that, I guess that's what I was trying to understand from your perspective, how to use those metaphors to understand a greater or gain a better understanding and a greater understanding.
I can maybe give an example of a metaphor that captures that duality that you're speaking of. So in South Africa, one of our local languages, in isiZulu, there's a saying that goes, the old dry dead grass is made new again by fire. So sometimes you need to destroy the old for something new and better to emerge. So I guess that's, as you're saying, the war metaphor is not necessarily all bad. There is some good in the bad.
Right. Okay. Yeah. That duality and a paradoxical integration from that. I mean, obviously, war. There is planning that has to go to that. So there's definitely lessons learned from there. Okay. So. I'm sorry, I was looking at a chat, I apologize, and we have a question, I think. Can Marguerite please post name of author of this model and the name of the model?
Yes, should I type it into the chat?
Sure.
Cool. So his name is Sohail Inayatullah.
So we talked a little bit about that duality, and I know that another kind of area that you like to explore is that in between state, that state of being transformative, of certainty and uncertainty, and being comfortable and being uncomfortable. Can you speak to a little bit about that importance of those knowledge of systems that can speak to that?
Yes, so that actually speaks to another topic I was hoping to chat to you about. I'm in the process of developing this, I don't know if you would call it a sense-making tool, or just an idea to ground you when you are in the state of turbulence or uncertainty and not knowing, where to go, or what's happening, or how to even make sense of anything. So everyone is familiar with, this idea of being in a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. But this term has been around since the 1980s. So it does feel like there needs to be a bit of an updated idea of what we're going through. I did recently hear about a tuna world, so a turbulent, unpredictable, novel, and ambiguous world. But I guess for me, just coming from South Africa, it feels like there needs to be a perspective from where I'm sitting. And what I propose is this idea of a Dela world, so DELA, where D stands for dynamic, E stands for emergent, L is for liminal, and A is for anthropocentric. So the word Dela actually comes from Zulu, one of our local languages, and it has this duality in meanings. So on the one hand, Dela means to be content or satisfied, but on the other hand, it means to abandon or to sacrifice. So I just thought that this word really did capture what we are experiencing when we go through a time of turbulence and uncertainty. And also just if you translate the words vuka and tuna, in isiZulu, vuka means to wake up or to have an awakening, which makes sense for at the time that this came about. But tuna means, to be inappropriate or unsuitable, and also it translates to a grave or a tombstone. So I guess just from a South African perspective, it felt like we needed a word that we could relate to as well.
Oh, that's pretty powerful. So is this a system of thought? How do we put this into practice?
So the idea behind this is, if you had to break up the word Dela into its individual parts and ask yourself questions, you would maybe be able to observe what's happening. So a lot of anthropology is based on participant observation. So you need to immerse yourself into a situation and experience it firsthand with an insider perspective. But at the same time, you need to take a step back and observe and have an outsider perspective. So if you had to apply Dela to that kind of thinking, if you take the word dynamic and you ask the question, what is changing? So what ideas or behaviors are either accelerating or slowing down or even stagnating? If you take the word emergent and ask yourself, what is new and what is old? So what are the things that are being created, replaced, or discarded? If you take the word liminal, which means to be in between states, if you ask yourself the question, what feels familiar and what seems strange? So look for things that are common between yourself and someone else, but also what is different. And then finally, the word anthropocentric, you could ask yourself the question, what is the connection between the internal and the external? So you as an individual or as a business, what impact are you having on the world, but also what impact does the world have on you?
So can you share a story of Dela? I mean, like in real, in practical, how do we implement that in our lives?
So I guess if you're a business going through this pandemic and you're uncertain what is this post-normal world that we are entering, just by definition, post-normal means that the old order is dying and the new is still emerging, and very little makes sense. So if you as a business are trying to figure out, what do we need to do next? Because obviously it's not going to be like the world we knew, and we don't even know what's happening or what's emerging. So if you just had to ask yourself those questions of, either within your internal organization or within the industry that you operate in or within the national context that you're in, if you ask yourself what is changing, what is emerging, what do I feel is being carried over from the old world into the new, and what impact do I have? If you ask yourself those questions, you might be able to figure out what is your new purpose, or is there something new that you need to innovate, or what is the message you want to communicate to your audience?
And is this something that, Marguerite, that you're working with your clients to implement that kind of thinking?
Yes, so this is actually something I'm also interested in working through with school children. Just as an individual activity for them, if they are in a situation where they feel, things are unpredictable or uncertain, how can they ground themselves and just look for things that they do feel are still familiar or known or certain, and maybe just reframe the way that they look at the things that are emerging. Maybe it's not as scary or disruptive as they think, and they can actually use that as a way to grow or benefit from it. But yeah, with clients, it's quite tricky, just because I think businesses who have done things, you know, for decades, they have a formula for success, and they're hoping that they can still use that formula. But it's just about helping them understand that the context and the world is changing. So our needs and behaviors, values are all going to change with it. So we're going to need a whole new set of products and services that respond to that.
Right, and obviously everyone's perspective is going to be different, and everyone's experiences, even throughout this pandemic, is very different from you know, country to country, to state. Some states here are open, and some states are locked down. So you know, it's a very different perspective that you're coming from it at. So,
and I mean, you can even apply it not just in the business world, but with all the social movements we see happening. You know, with Black Lives Matter, with the Me Too movement, all of this. If you're feeling disrupted or uncertain what role you can play, it just helps to ground yourself and ask yourself these questions. Just be part of that movement.
Great, thank you. It's very interesting. Let me just see if I think we might have some questions. Someone had asked if we could type out the meanings of Della. So maybe we could do that. If you want to just send that to us, and maybe we can post it on the website. Kelly, is that something that we can do instead of having Marguerite type them out now?
Yes, absolutely. That's fine.
Great. Thank you. Can the answers be posted that she just listed? It's an anonymous attendee. I'm not quite sure. I don't know. I'm not sure what questions that she listed that you're speaking. The anonymous attendee. I'm sorry. I'm not following you. How, I'm not sure if this is how disrupted, maybe it's disrupted, ethnography is being applied in the case of Della.
How disrupted ethnography is being applied in the case of Della. Is that in the context of the pandemic? Maybe how ethnography is changing? I can maybe give some examples.
Oh, sorry, it's distributed. How distributed ethnography is being applied in this case of Della.
Eduardo, could you explain a little bit what you mean by distributed? Just on the topic of ethnography, I must say it's been fascinating seeing how researchers have adapted to the pandemic, just looking at, you know, we're all stuck at home, either in lockdown or trying to isolate and physical distance. So it's interesting to see people using technology just as a tool to connect with people, or even just turning the camera on themselves and looking at how they themselves are going through the pandemic and what that says about the human experience.
So Chris Dimming, I will just say that he wrote, as a fellow anthropologist, I really like this framework. I think that capturing the dynamic notion of systems and society is important and a good antidote for more static ways of viewing business and process. So thank you, Chris.
It's always good meeting another anthropologist. Community.
There you go. All right, let me see if Eduardo had
so I see he's asking about the sense maker. I
Mm-hmm.
think this is in relation to Dave Snowden and how he combines complexity with ethnography. If I remember correctly, it has to do with deep thinking or deep analysis. So it's not something that I've used, but I've definitely had conversations with Dave and also Sonia, who's also in South Africa. Definitely worth checking out their work on SenseMaker.
Great. So I know that we're getting close to the end of our time. Believe it or not, it goes by quickly. So can you share with the audience one or two topics or something that they can implement immediately in their personal or professional life to help them navigate these turbulent times and beyond?
Yes, so a term I came across is syndemic, which just from my understanding is that it's multiple pandemics happening simultaneously, or the conditions that create the possibility for multiple pandemics. So just with seeing all of the different things happening in the world right now, not just with COVID-19, but all these other narratives that are surfacing, especially with with Black Lives Matter, which I think is a very prominent conversation right now. I guess I just want to have a call to action and ask people, it's not enough to be non-racist, which is just a passive rejection of racist ideas and behaviors, but to be actively and overtly anti-racist and just dismantle the things that keep the system in place, whether that's in your personal life or in your professional life. Just evaluating the relationships that we build and how we contribute to change.
Yeah, I think it's from a society perspective, everything that's happening not only in the United States but around the world. I had this conversation and just curious how it would be, if it would be the same if we didn't have COVID, if there wasn't a pandemic that we were dealing with, and would there still be as much of a groundswell around Black Lives Matter, or what would that look like? How would it look differently?
Definitely.
So very, very interesting for sure. So I think we're just about at the end. Again, thank you so much for your time, Marguerite. I really appreciate it. It was a great conversation. It was great getting to know you. And I really appreciate all of your time and energies and contributions.
Yes, thank you for everyone who contributed to this and putting this together. It's incredible.